Well, Richard Friesen, thank you so much for making time for our little program.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. I've listened to some of your conversations, and what I love about them is just the natural way they seem to flow and how you carry them.
No, thank you. Yeah, well, hopefully we can achieve that today. They can live up to that bar.
Yeah, I'm
Appreciate
raising a really high bar here, so
I
don't
appreciate
screw it up.
it. Yeah. So yeah, the audience might be a little surprised that we're having this conversation, and I would put you in the category of sort of a practitioner with how you've helped people in real life. You spent years working in like high stakes environments,
Mhm.
where I imagine emotions could kind of run high sometimes.
Oh
And,
boy. Yes.
and can you think of some, or tell us about some parallels you see between that sort of the stress of financial trading, um, and the emotional stress people are feeling about political discourse and sort of engaging with friends and family on political matters.
Oh boy. What you're talking about, and I really love this question, is because at the base, we're human beings. We have the survival mechanism, the limbic systems, we have the neocortex, we have all these things. We have trauma in our past, we have belief systems, we have behaviors that are repeated. And the nice thing about working with traders, both when I built a trading firm and as a coach, is that in the financial markets, you get feedback. Bang, bang, bang. Whereas if you're building a business or you're building a career, the um, time and the fuzziness between your input and the results just aren't as clear. And as a result, we can repeat the same behavioral patterns over and over again and not get us to where we want to go.
Yeah, it seems like we do have a difficulty sometimes when the cause and effect are separated by time,
Mhm.
that we don't really often make that connection.
Exactly.
One thing, a phrase, and I don't know if you happen to stumble across it on the website, but a phrase we use here is what I call outrage porn. And
Mhm.
this is this idea of this outrage media that's designed to get us angry and upset. And I use the outrage part because it's obvious they're trying to rile up those
Mhm.
emotions. And
Mhm.
then the porn part is because we're sort of addicted to it, right? We keep turning back to
Oh boy.
it. And
Oh yes.
so, I guess, when we talk about that kind of outrage media that fuels that kind of cycle of
Mhm.
that's kind of fueling this anger and division, making us more hostile towards those on the other side. Because one
Mhm.
aspect of this outrage porn that people often don't pick up on is that I'm mostly talking about people kind of on your side, the people that you kind of agree with, telling you something terrible the other side is doing. And then
Yep.
we'd like to see that because that helps
Oh
us,
yeah.
it helps us feel better about like, oh, we're better than them and this kind of thing. So maybe some of that can, you can feel like, I guess one part of that is how can mindset, you talk about mindset in your book and or I should say in your tools. And so how can mindset maybe help us manage some of that?
Well, I think you've hit upon it exactly. Viktor Frankl, in his book In Search of Meaning, he was in the most horrific conditions that a human being can be in. And the surprise is, he said, it's how I experience those, and that is my choice. Wow. So we have choices on how to experience the news as it comes in, people who believe other things. But our survival mechanisms get so triggered, in the lower part of our brain here, that boom, something happens, boom. There is no there's no distance between the experience we have and our beliefs and our reactions. So my work is, I call it the golden keys. First, it's awareness, and I'll do it right now. I'm talking a little fast. My stomach's a little tight. So physical awareness, emotional awareness. I have a very pleasant connection with you right now. It's feeling really nice. And then what are my thoughts? The quality of my thoughts. And my quality of my thoughts are, I'm really excited right now about all the things we can talk about. So first is awareness, and then is acceptance. I didn't say, oh, my stomach's tight. Rich, Lucy, you shouldn't have a tight stomach. That's not helpful. But if I can accept what I discover, then I can say, have agency. Now, what do I want? So the process is to look at our internals, look at the incoming, and have agents to say, how do I want to experience that? Like I just talked to a podcaster this morning that had an unpleasant event happen. Bang. His reactions were, there's hate, there's this, there's that. No, and no. But he could also say, there's somebody who's really stressed, who doesn't see my point of view, who's probably fears it for some trauma in his past. I wish him well and hope he can improve and get better. The difference between his health on that immediate reaction and the other is significant. Developing that agency and ability to reframe the experiences that comes in, oh my gosh, is that powerful.
That's awesome. I really like, that acceptance part of it because, we often, we just, our worst critic, we're often our own worst critic, and we can take that attitude where we get mad at ourselves, even if after the fact. Sometimes we'll review it and go like, wow, I didn't handle that right. No, I'm mad again. So I'm only making it worse. Like I already had a bad experience. Now I'm making it worse. Right. And we do tend to fall into that. And so I do really like that, but it can be hard in the moment to do that. And sometimes.
Well, let's stop right there. Now here's a hypnotic suggestion. It can be hard in the moment. So what if you were to rephrase that and say, in the past it feels hard, but what if I can find a way to make it feel good in the moment and step into a better reframe? So then what you're doing is rather than programming yourself, it's going to be hard in the moment, to reframe it, that word, it's possible to step into something that actually feels better.
Mm-hmm. And we have I have a show that, is kind of geared for sort of science literate and kind of trying to present good information and sort of keep some science into it. Mm-hmm. And I know sometimes people hear terms like mindset and they think, it's kind of woo-woo, alternative sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. And obviously that's not true. There is a lot of science backing this kind of stuff up. But also sometimes kind of compare it to like an intentionality. Maybe would you say that's a reasonable way to think about it?
Sure. There's that, and the word intentionality is really important. I discovered the power of how I think and what I believe and how I behave, and it came as a voice in the middle of the night. And my work now has been to how can I make those transformations intentional, not only for myself, but for my clients as well. So I think intentionality is a powerful word. It's a way that we can look at how we're making changes in our life that not only feel better, but that work for us. So we can go down that path, but I think it's a key to opening a really good door.
Yeah. So, I mean, as you know, we're in this time of this deep political division.
Yep.
Do you see some skills and mindsets? Are there some basic things, like practical things you could tell listeners about that could maybe help?
Yeah, I work with a group called Braver Angels, and that's exactly what we do. Is we look for communication skills. Like the basic is just to understand. So what you say is XYZ, is that right? Oh, no, not quite. It's like XZZ. Oh, okay. So what you're saying is that just listening. That's a skill. We do exercises where we state, what do you think the other side believes? And then what the other side actually believes. The worlds are just so different. So on just a skill level, there's a whole bunch of skills you can use. On a deeper level, and this is the hard part, and I don't expect any of your listeners to accept this. Well, maybe a short story. I grew up in Kansas. My father was an evangelical preacher. I carried my Bible to school. I witnessed, and I believed with all my heart that I had the correct religion. Not only fundamental evangelical Christianity, but that particular form of evangelical Christianity? Do you baptize forward or backwards? Premillennium, postmillennium. All those distinctions, I knew that Rich Friesen had the truth. So then I went to college at a Wheaton College, Christian school, west of Chicago. And I went into in Chicago and taught inner city daytime relief school. Oh my God. To see a 6-year-old girl afraid to cross a certain street when we were walking to the park because she was in the wrong gang territory and afraid she'd get beaten up just ripped my heart out. Screw conservatism. I joined the Northwest Community Organization, which Saul Alinsky, which is really radical, is really radical. At that time, I was really fighting a very progressive battle. But then I saw the corruption on that side of the spectrum. Oh my gosh. Power, manipulation, do almost anything to win and gain power. So I moved to California and somebody gave me a copy of Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged. Kaboom! I became a libertarian, or, a self-righteous libertarian. I ran for U.S. Congress as a libertarian. And then as I've grown older, I've looked at each time Rich Friesen had the absolute truth. No question. So now I look at each of those states. And the question then is, I'm working on a book called Healing the Political Divide. But there's a part of me that still has the truth. It's an emotional belief. So how do I handle that? One, I know that Rich Friesen isn't the only guy in the world to have the absolute truth, the one guy that happens to have it. But I still have these strong emotional reactions. So what I've done is I've relabeled my beliefs as emotional beliefs. They're emotional truths. And I draw a circle around them and say, well, right now, currently, it could change, this is Rich Friesen's emotional truth. Now, David, I know that you have a very different emotional truth than I do. But if I can reframe your truth, and so you accept it as your emotional truth, and then we can be buddies because we say, okay, here's my emotional truth, and I can say, well, here's my emotional truth. Here's how it connects to my past, my survival mechanisms. Then I don't have to say, I don't know anything, but I've put my emotions in a perspective that can be useful to me and useful for our relationship.
Yeah, one of the things about doing the show, as many episodes and as many different kinds of experts that I've spoken with, is, you kind of talked about you were sure you had the one truth, and that I did a whole episode on certainty, about uncertainty is kind of like a red flag for me now, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's what enables us to sort of dehumanize other people because we're so certain we're right and they're wrong and this kind of thing. So it's always, something to be concerned about. But then the other half of that is, like you were sort of hinting at there, I think, is that, but then everything just becomes gray and I don't have any opinions anymore.
Yep.
And that seems like also not necessarily, a healthy thing, or that can be uncomfortable. That can be destabilizing.
Yeah, you've just pointed out the difficulty in the dichotomy. Go ahead.
No, so I was just going to ask you to, maybe you can comment on that a little bit.
Yeah, well, what you pointed out is exactly the problem, is that on one hand, we have these without any beliefs. I'm going to become a monk or some sort of guru, and I'm just going to float in the universe without believing anything. That's not the way our human brain works. Our human brain is still tribal, and it wants to have a belief, and it wants to belong, and wants to have certainty. Because, if you think about certainty, as you certainly have, that's what we just want so badly in our hearts, to be certain. So that's why I've looked at my certainty as an emotional state. So, for example, in a conversation with you, I might say, well, the current model I'm using that works for me, the current way I'm thinking, emotionally, Like, for example, if we were to have a discussion on political philosophy, I could say, psychologically and emotionally, what's really important to me is my personal independence, my personal freedom, and not to be interfered with by any other organization or government or whatever. This is my emotional core. So if we then expand that to political philosophy, it's going to come out to support my emotional core. And you can say, well, my emotional core is I see the pain and suffering in the world. And I think we have a greater calling as human beings to alleviate the pain and suffering. So I just made that up. I don't know if that's true or not. But if somebody had that, then I can say, well, that's really interesting. Let's see how they overlap or how they conflict. But if I recognize it as my current model, my current way of thinking versus, my fundamental evangelical experience, then you can feel safe talking to me because I've put a gap between my emotional beliefs as being current and who I am and who you are as a human being.
It's interesting to me too. Like you talked about braver angels. I'm a moderator for another similar kind of effort called Crossing Party Lines that has these types of conversations where they bring people, and you just hear these different. You get to hear different viewpoints, and there's no viewpoint that's kicked out as long as you're sort of within the rules and you're not abusing people and things like that. Bring any position you want, and it's the participant has to opt into this idea. They have what they call a braver space or a brave space instead of a safe space, where it's the listener's job to be prepared for, to be okay, to work through, be brave about whatever conversation you're going to have to listen to, as opposed to sometimes safe space kind of means I'm going to be careful what I say. In this conversation,
I like that. Yes,
sort of switches it around. That it's up to the listener to be ready to hear things you may not like. And I do like that because you get to hear things. But and from that and other conversations I've had, I also do these things I call street outrage, where I interview just regular people, and I go into complete listen mode, where I don't push back, I don't argue, I don't try to change. I just kind of hear. I want to hear where they're coming from, and from all of those things and other things as well. It's funny that you hear. People have sort of the same. It's the classic example, the same facts being interpreted different ways, but like people on both sides, and there's more than two sides, but to simplify it, people on both sides of sort of the political spectrum will say almost the exact same things, like I'm pro-democracy, or I'm worried about democracy. Mm-hmm. And I'm worried about democracy, but they both mean totally different things, right?
Yep.
And things like that. There's a whole bunch of examples like that. And so I think this is a big challenge we have often when we're going into these conversations, because you think you have like a monopoly on believing in protecting democracy or whatever, right? And whichever place you are on the spectrum, and you're going in that conversation with that mindset, and this other person thinks the same thing, like they have a monopoly on democracy as well. Until you can have that enlightenment to go, oh, they have different. They have a different perspective on the same exact facts, and that can be, I think, that can be challenging for people to appreciate, because I have the right facts, and not only do I have the facts, but like my interpretation, I don't even realize that I did an interpretation of those facts many times, right? It's just facts. I'm just going with facts, and I've talked to a lot of philosophers and epistemology and everything that facts are only part of how we get knowledge, right? A lot of it is social and emotional.
And facts themselves are prepackaged. I mean, the facts I read about the Middle East, or the facts I read about the COVID and the response to the COVID. I mean, the complications in a complex adaptive world and trying to package it in some words already, that is not prejudice in a negative sense, but they've got to just eliminate a lot of stuff and simplify it. And so it goes into our brain in a simplified form, and then we expand on it in a number of different directions. One of the liberating things for me is, well, on the exchange floors, I always listen to the news, not for the facts, but what people believed. If people listen to this, what will they believe? And then how will they behave? And if I can get ahead of those beliefs and behaviors, that's where I've made a lot of my money.
Interesting. There's this, I know there was some recent polling I saw, I think, talking about how 70% of voters think, believe that we need to do, major reforms politically or economically, which I think it was a mistake to bundle those two, because I think different people are meaning different things when they say this. But that 70% either think we need major reforms or we need to throw the system. So I think it was about 14% say we just need to throw the system out and start over.
Yeah. The challenge of throwing the system out is that it opens the door to the worst part of our humanity. That systems and guardrails, like, I told you I was brought up religious. I'm no longer religious. It seems kind of silly to believe that Rich Friesen had the right religion just because he was born in, happened of all the religions to be born into the right one. But the value of growing up religious is that it had a higher value to appeal to. In other words, my life as a religious person was always to compare myself to a higher value. How can I do better? How can I strive to do better? We would have prayer meetings and separate the men and women where we would hold hands and pray for each other to be better human beings. Oh my gosh, the power of that community to do that. And when we're talking about religion, family, rule of law, property rights, the Constitution, and all that structure, and to say, we need to wipe it out and start over. And there's a play, A Man for All Seasons, Thomas Becket, I believe. And in it, Sir Thomas More is talking to his acolyte. And the acolyte, and I'm not going to get this exact, said, I would wipe out all the laws in England to get at the devil. And Sir Thomas More said, and what happens when the devil turns around? A little bit of a longer conversation, but those who want to wipe it out, like I've seen on the extreme left at the Northwest Community Organization, the Saul Alinsky, what happens when you say, we're going to wipe out the entire structures? It gets pretty ugly in there.
Well, and I think we don't, it's part of that negativity bias that we have, that we don't realize how good we have it and that we already have a system designed to be updated. Like if it needs updates, all those mechanisms are there already.
Yes, indeed. If somebody counted all the good things that happened to me, I mean, my bed is soft, my pillow's perfect, I get up when I want to, I brew a cup of coffee, I start my car, everyone on the freeway is obeying the rules and laws. Occasionally somebody doesn't, but there's a million things that go right in my life every day, and they don't have anything to do. I depend on the goodwill, cooperation, and good manners of thousands of people every day, thousands of incidents. Wow. I've never experienced food poisoning in my life. How many billions and trillions of activities have to go into that and be right and get it right? So like I said at the beginning of the program, I wake up grateful every morning.
Yeah. And there's that research about how, like, for every negative thing, you need to have like 10, you need to identify like 10 positive things to sort of counteract it. And then I think that's part of our problem.
Yeah. And every negative thing we can say, oh, how can I reframe it? How can I learn from it? How can I not blame myself? Wow, this is interesting. I never thought of it that way. So we can set a mindset that even the negative, I mean, if in the concentration camp, you can create the experience you want, that means for most of us Westerners, the little irritations, if we can't do that, means we've got a lot of growing to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So if there's one takeaway you want listeners to get from all this, what would it be?
You are an agent in your life, and practicing being an agent through awareness of your physiology, your emotions, and your thoughts, and then being an agent to say, what do I want? How do I want to experience my Uncle John, who is a Trumper, or my Aunt Jane, who believes Pamela Harris is the most brilliant person in the world? How do I want to experience that? And the answer can be is I want to see them as human beings. My personal core value is respect for the dignity and integrity of every human being. And if I start with that, and if I look at you with that start, my world changes. My world changes dramatically.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, okay, so listeners interested in finding out about this, where do they turn? Where do they start? What resources can they turn to?
Oh my gosh. Conversations.money. And my book is there. And it has a whole bunch of exercises that not only impact your financial relationships, but also how you think and how you feel about the world at large. So the book is A Private Conversation with Money. The website is conversations.money. And there's a free course there that you can take that's online.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm gonna check that out.
Okay.
So is that like a free online self-paced course?
Yeah, and a whole bunch of exercises that go through, like for my years of clients, I have amalgamated all the challenges and stress and difficulties people have into one character, Joe. The poor Joe, he's got the burden of them at all, and he has a conversation with a mythical character called Money, and together they work through all of those. And each issue has an exercise that is associated with it that allow you to become more aware of your internal mindset.
Oh, that's great. That's what a lot of us need for sure. All right. Well, Rich, it was really nice speaking with you.
David, this was a pleasure. I feel when I look at you and review our conversation, I so appreciate your good-heartedness and your desire to have the world a better place. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, you take care.
You too.